Michael Thompson from the 12th Man Rising joins us again tonight on the HawksZone Rundown. A little Super Bowl preview show for you guys, but we're going to really focus on the Eagles here because the Chiefs, man, I mean, it's just the same old song and dance, man. The Chiefs are good, but you know what? It's kind of cool to focus on the Eagles because they're in the NFC, and they've been doing some cool things to how they're building and constructing their roster. So we're going to kind of go down and take some lessons from the Eagles and just how we can maybe, emulate a few of those things to building the Seahawks into that NFC power once again, because it's been a long, long time. And so we're going to get into all of that with Michael on the other side. Guys, we're live tonight, so, flood the comment section in. Throw your Super Bowl predictions, too, along the way, because we're going to have some fun with that. We're really going to, if you get some Super Chats in, we're going to definitely get to those. We're probably not going to get to a lot of Q&A, but if you get your Super Chats in, we will 100% hit on those for sure. And, guys, if you've been watching the show, liking what you've been watching, and you haven't subbed yet, go down, hit the sub button for us, like the videos, share the videos. Really helps out the channel a lot. So on the other side, Michael Thompson.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me.
Yeah, let's go. It's go time, baby.
Here comes Gino. Steps up, takes that shot to the end zone. It is Metcalf. 20.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You about to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Off me.
Nobody in the world can do it.
Are you kidding me? Trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Jackson Smith is jigged up. The circus music moves in. Throw it with Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
Guys, welcome back to the Hawks Zone. Michael Thompson for the 12th Man Rising joins us again on the show. Had a great conversation last time. Mike, you were here. So, hey, man, glad you're back on, chopping it up right before Super Bowl here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Super excited. I know some people are a little burnt out by the Chiefs and the Eagles being back in it again for the second time in 3 years. Kind of leads into an article I wrote a couple years ago that has aged pretty well. It's more enjoyable to talk about that than the 10-year anniversary tweets I've been seeing all the last few days for the Super Bowl that happened 10 years ago. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. It's I think that just goes for any sport, right? You appreciate what Mahomes and the Chiefs have done, but it just you get a little burnt out from it, and you want to see something fresh. But you know what? Looking at this Eagles team and the way they're back in the Super Bowl, they're sort of one of those teams that's sort of like, they're good, but they're flying under the radar. They don't get it, they don't get a ton of talk, right? Like all this year was Detroit, sprinkle maybe some Green Bay in there, but it was really the Detroit Lions, and that was just the new hot team in the NFC that it's their year. Niners fell off this year, so just it is what it is, but here we are again, man. The Eagles back in the Super Bowl. And, it's the way they're doing it, the way they've constructed their roster, right? And we're going to get into that. You look at, you talk about, say, depth in the draft. And, you look how the Eagles have been doing it. How critical, if you look at it from a Seahawks perspective, to find depth in the draft, say how the Eagles have done and sort of let those guys develop. How critical is it for the Hawks to sort of look to do similar things?
I mean, it's the heart and soul of how you stay as a contender in the NFL, and then when you hit, that's how you get to the next level and you stay at the next level. Right. Some of these things that we're going to talk about this, I wrote this article 2 years ago, right before the Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl in Glendale. And, we talk about depth in the draft, and both of those teams absolutely dominated the draft that year, which helped get them to the Super Bowl. I believe the Chiefs that year drafted 6 players that started on the Super Bowl. And in the 2 years that have since passed, I think they've kind of gone a little bit of a different route than what I wrote back then, but the Eagles have held true. You draft guys that help keep whatever window you're in open longer, right? The Seahawks had arguably one of the greatest back-to-back years of a draft ever was at 11 and 12. You talk about all those superstars and Hall of Fame guys that were drafted at the time, but it was pretty dark for a while after that. There was some few hits, very few and far between. You look at the Eagles, the draft before they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs. In that year, they took Jordan Davis, who has really began to ascend and probably played his best game in the NFC Championship, the defensive tackle for Philly. They drafted Cam Jurgens at pick 51, which he kind of sat behind Kelsey for a year, and now he's arguably the best center in football, right? Like, how do you go from having the best center to probably ever play the game in Kelsey? You draft, you prepare, you have one eye on today, one eye on tomorrow, and now they have the best center in the NFL again, arguably. Maybe the best center is on the Chiefs. After the Super Bowl season, what do? They take Jalen Carter because 8 other teams passed on him, including the Seattle Seahawks. And we can get into the Devin Witherspoon, Jalen Carter debate. I like Devin Witherspoon. He's in the Pro Bowl. He deserves to be in the Pro Bowl. He's a very talented player. But Jalen Carter, I think, is in a different level at a position that's probably a little bit more important when you're great at it. So, yeah, there's a little bit of the, man, what if we had taken him at that moment? Then later in that draft, they take Nolan Smith, who uber talented, all the potential in the world ceiling. His floor was pretty low. Philadelphia takes a shot on it because they can, and now look at him. He's arguably their best pass rushing weapon, and they don't even miss Hassan Reddick because Nolan Smith's doing that. Then this year in the draft, what do? First 2 picks, Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, all of a sudden, you can't pass on them on the outside. They've got a young, talented secondary. And so they kind of do an interesting thing where they're hitting on those first, day 1 and day 2 picks. And when you get 2 top 50 picks or 3 top 75 picks, you can't make mistakes. You have to hit on those. They don't have to be superstars. The Eagles have hit solid to great on their last 3 drafts. That's 6 for 6, I would say. You look at the Seahawks since like 2019, other than Witherspoon and Jackson Smith and Jigba, that draft, I think that was 2022 or 2023. 2022, they hit Cross and Mafe. You look at everything after and before is what I should say, bad, rough. Obviously, did the Jamal Adams trade really mess that up? But like Philly, for as long as Howie Roseman, their general manager, has been there, kind of doesn't miss on those top 50 picks. May not always be a superstar, but he gets a guy that is playing in a conference championship game. And that's Philly plays in a conference championship game every 4 years, it feels like, because they're always there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I got, say, the last 4 years of the Philadelphia Eagles kind of drafts here, Mike. So you're talking about basically your first 3 picks in every year, your first 3 picks. So 2020, you had Jalen Reagor, Jalen Hurts, Davion Taylor. 2 of those guys aren't even with the Eagles anymore, I don't believe, but you got your franchise quarterback in round 2. You go to 2021, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson. Right there, first 2 hit, right? I go through the rest of that, list of that draft class. Okay, yeah, there's some depth guys, Kenneth Gainwell, nothing too over the top. Then we get to 2022, Jordan Davis, Cam Jurgens, Jacob Dean, like hit. 2023, like you said, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, like, even safety Sidney Brown for them is making impact plays, it's mind-boggling to me because you look at it and then you go 2024, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalix Hunt, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Like, you got guys in this class throughout where you go, yeah, okay, this guy's going to be a starter for us. This guy's going to be. If I took and went and looked at Seattle's drafts from that same type of era, we're maybe walking out with 4, 5 guys that we can say. And like Derek Hall just made an impact this year. Boye Mafe, I think we've seen Boye Mafe's ceiling potentially. Like, we hope that there's still more, but maybe this is what Boye Mafe is. He's got a bit of a pass rush. He's situationally used. And we have, 2 rotational pass rushers out of Hall and Mafe, potentially. I think Hall might have a little bit more in the tank. But you look at those and we go back to it. We talk about Witherspoon and JSN, and it's just, to me, it's so mind-boggling to look at it and go, we've got 2 of the most tenured GMs in the NFL, yet their drafts are so different in the last 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think John has kind of admitted he probably strayed a little too far trying to get cute on certain things. Like, I know everyone's made this comment before, but like the taking of D. Eskridge over Creed Humphrey arguably is the reason why Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll aren't still in Seattle. Like, if Creed is there and is maybe he's not as good as he would have been with the Philadelphia or the Kansas City coaching staff, but like you put a top 3 center from day one, which is what he has been. And I'm an Oklahoma Sooners fan, so I watched every single snap that dude ever played in college football. That guy was a center for 2 Heisman Trophy winners, 1 Heisman runner-up, and basically was in the college football playoff every year, kicking ass and taking names. How that guy made it to the 3rd round or whatever round it was, 2nd or 3rd round, I can't remember, blows my mind. And he is arguably one of the 5 to 6 best players on the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty. Like, he will go down as a Hall of Fame player if he stays healthy. And there's no reason we should have passed on him, unless that was just Russell Wilson saying, I need a target, I need a weapon. Which then again, why are you going with D. Eskridge with all the age and the factors of the reasons why you shouldn't have taken him at that pick when Creed Humphrey's there? I don't know. And maybe that's just me being a little bit too optimistic of what it could have been, but that could have solidified your offensive line. Maybe made Russ have a little bit more time, less sacks, less pressure, and then everything just maybe would have worked out better, or maybe it all still would have, but you at least would have had a premier player in Creed Humphrey. And it's just, that's a good one. Like Baltimore, Philadelphia, Kansas City, Buffalo, these teams that are in the Final Four or the, right in that mix every single year, you never look at their draft and be like, that's a reach. Like even in Seattle's glory days, when we took Bruce Irvin, we got an F for that, right? And Bruce Irvin worked out. And I think that those, like the Russell Wilson pick was early, the Bobby Wagner pick was early, the Robert Turbin pick was early in those drafts. Cam Chancellor, he's too big to play a safety. These things worked out in a perfect series of events that created a 2-time NFC or back-to-back NFC championship team. But it almost created a habit of, I know more than everyone else does. And some people like to make fun of the Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, and all these mock drafts and like, oh, they're just working for ESPN. They're trying to create debate and stuff. Sometimes they actually do know what they're talking about. And it isn't the worst thing to kind of take the guy that should be taken at that slot when everyone in the media and all the websites are saying that and all the former scouts that are in TV are saying that. Like, there's nothing wrong with taking the guy at 9 that probably should have been taken at 7 or 8, right? Like, that's what makes Philadelphia always good, Baltimore always good, Buffalo, Phil, and Kansas City. And that is the echelon that we want to get to. We saw the difference this year when we played Buffalo. We saw last year the difference when we played Baltimore, and the year before when we played Kansas City. Like, each year we've played one of these core 4 premier teams, and we've gotten absolutely destroyed. And we got destroyed in the trenches, which kind of leads into a later topic. But like, those teams don't miss on these on these day 1 and day 2 picks, and we are missing at a rate that is crazy. Has it been better? Yes, in the last couple of years, I would say it's been a little bit better, but it's also still to be determined because it's still early in the game.
Yeah, Mike, I want to touch on a point you just brought up because you talked about the early years of John, and it's almost a blessing and a curse, right? Obviously, won a Super Bowl, which you can never take that away, and we can go another 50 years and. It's the greatest thing ever. But at the same time, you kind of said, now I can do no wrong sort of thing. I'm getting a little cute. Yeah, I'll go after, maybe this D. Eskridge thing will work out and I told you so later on. But man, we've been going down this road for years now, right? So, he's got to look himself in the mirror. You think at some point and say, look, this philosophy is no longer working, right? So, we talked about Philly, the teams you mentioned, Baltimore, those organizations, it's easy to say, well, let's just, flip a switch, John, time to look in the mirror. But it really goes back to, is this a problem with who we got? And then we've talked about this a lot now. How hot is his seat? How much time does he have? Because really we can sit here and say, like, I can ask you and say, look, how can we improve our draft approach moving forward? And that includes with John Schneider there. We can say, well, if we move on from John, this should be the new philosophy. Because really, I mean, I'll ask you the question, but, how do we improve, our approach moving forward? And that's John. And do you think it's even something he will do? Like, do you really see a potential difference? I mean, look, the first 2 picks last season, he tried to go trench, or he went trenches. Byron Murphy and Christian Haynes obviously looks like a pretty big project right now at this point. But and then the year before, we sort of went reverse what Philly did, right? Philly goes trenches, then they go the 2 DBs. We go sort of, we know what we did. So what do you think about that? How do we improve our approach? And do you think it will change?
If it's ever going to change, it'll be in this draft. If it's not going to change, then he has to strike gold again, or else he's probably done after this year or the next year at the latest.
Right.
I don't think anybody would say that there was a bad thought process in Byron Murphy at was it 15 or 16 we took him? 16. There's also a reason he shouldn't have been there at 16. And I still think Byron Murphy would be a good player. And most defensive tackles, except for Jalen Carter, don't normally come in right away and are super duper stars. It's usually year 2 you see the noticeable jump. Here's the problem, though. Nobody has a problem with Byron Murphy. The problem is, a pick later, your rival in the team that you were supposed to be better than this year took the defensive rookie of the year in Jared Verse, which, to be honest, I love Jared Verse. I had him as my number 5 overall prospect. And so I thought we were going to take Murphy, but at 15, I was hoping we would take Verse. But that's just kind of one of those things we talked about last time when I was on your guys' show, hitting on those moments when they're there for you. And I hope we don't look back kind of like a Devin Witherspoon, where Devin Witherspoon might be a Pro Bowl player, but Jalen Carter might be an all-pro player. Byron Murphy might be a good defensive tackle on an 11, 12-win team max, whereas Jared Verse might be the face of this Rams new era, whatever this looks like. I mean, they won the division title, and Jared Verse is probably the second most valuable player on that team for what happened. Honestly, you could probably make the case he was more valuable than Matthew Stafford, who was kind of not good for half the year and stuff. I mean, it was probably Kyron Williams and him were the reason why they won that division. And so that's just one of those things where I think it was, in my opinion, my scouting as an amateur scout, I think Jared Verse's ceiling as an edge rusher was far more higher for what he could do in the NFL than what Byron Murphy could do as a defensive tackle that was a run stuffer that can rush the passer, but he's a run stuffing defensive tackle. That pairs with Leo and Cat Williams and stuff. So, but I think what makes Philadelphia so successful is that they have stuck to their philosophy. You look in those drafts that Bryce pointed out, they are going trenches, quarterback. Then if they find a Heisman Trophy wide receiver, you don't mess around. You take the guy, right? I don't care if he's 10 pounds lighter than everyone else. He freaking plays like he's Steve Smith 2.0, kind of that kind of player. Does Jalen Reagor work out? No, but Jalen Reagor was such a stud in the Big 12 at TCU. You can understand taking that pick there. Did Carson Wentz work out? You know what? Before he snapped his leg, he was the MVP. And so who knows whatever would have happened. And it sounds like there was more personality issues than anything. But they took shots. And then when a DB showed up like Mitchell, like Cooper DeJean, they had the trenches figured out. And so they built this foundation, right? Which then when you build that foundation, you're then able to take a Jalen Carter who has serious character concerns. You know what you haven't heard a whole lot of in the last 2 years is about Jalen Carter getting into trouble. He's definitely got an attitude, and you kind of need some of those guys on that team. You need some ass kickers, some dudes that aren't going to put up with anything.
Oh, yeah.
But he's also been staying out of trouble, and he's arguably probably one of the 5 or 6 best defensive tackles in football already. Like, they created an environment, whereas Seattle is so scared because of the Malik McDowell stuff that Schneider has gone away from that and hasn't. And I 100% believe Malik McDowell played a significant role in them passing on Jalen Carter. And I've heard from people that the interview that he had in Seattle wasn't the best, and maybe that sucks, and maybe he didn't want to be in Seattle. We'll never know that whole story. But the fact is that was the best player in the draft, and the Seahawks were one of the 8 teams that let him get to pick 9. And now Jalen Carter is in the 2nd Super Bowl in his 3rd season.
The one thing, that's really interesting, Mike, that you kind of alluded to with, the first thing Seattle did when they had Pete Carroll and they had John Schneider was take Bruce Irvin. They, got an F for that. draft class, the one key aspect to that, I guess, era of Seattle drafting, Pete Carroll was so familiar with college football. Like, he was so familiar with Cam Chancellor and a bunch of these guys that, you know, teams weren't going to take a risk on, but he knew what they were going to be and how they'd fit in his scheme. As that group of scouts and everything got farther away from Pete being in college football, the drafting got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I think the worst draft that Seattle had was 2017. Delano Hill, Shaquille Griffin, Malik McDowell, that whole class. Like, it was supposed to kind of be this reinvigoration of adding back, you know, the Legion of Boom 2.0 with all the DBs we took, and Tedrick Thompson and all these guys, and the amount of guys we missed on in that draft by taking certain players. It was astonishing. And I'm worried that John won't ever get back to, and I don't know if John is a great drafter. That's the one thing that's kind of the mystery here, is, like you said, he has to hit gold this year, or he has to change how he does things. Because yes, we've had some good players out of these last few classes: Witherspoon, JSN, you know, Derek Hall, Ken Walker, Charles Cross, Boy Mafe, but none of them are, like, I'd say maybe JSN and Charles Cross, but really JSN and maybe Witherspoon are they really only the game changers, if you want to call them that. Where when you look at the Eagles classes, you go, there's a game changer, and there's a game changer, and there's a franchise quarterback, and there's this and this and this. And that's where I'm just so interested to know, like, how Howie Roseman views the way his board works and the way they view things over in Philadelphia versus how we view things here in Seattle. Because, again, you have two of the longest tenured GMs, but just such radically different results. And it's not like the Eagles are picking in the top 10 all the time. They're a team that's like us, and they're in that, you know, hey, we're going to win roughly 9 games a year, and kind of, yeah, maybe we have the 1 year that slips, but they're that team that's going to be in that same kind of category, yet they seem to be hitting more consistently than we ever do.
Yeah, and I think one that goes back to the solid foundation that they have laid by, if you have a good offensive line and a good defensive line and good coaches, you're always gonna your ceiling, or your floor is always gonna be that 8 to 9 win range. And that's a good place to be, because when you do hit on things and you can take more risks, that's when you get 12, 13, 14, 15 wins is what they've won this year. When I think of Howie Roseman, I think he drafts a lot like how the NBA drafts, because he does know he has job security. This guy has been a part of 3 different eras of teams that have dominated the NFC, gone to Super Bowls. Andy Reid, McNabb, Carson Wentz, Doug Peterson, Nick Foles, that loaded team. This new iteration with Saquon and Hurts over the last couple of years, and Sirianni, he can be comfortable. He can say, you know what, I'm going to trade my pick because I don't think Treylon Burks has the highest ceiling, but I know AJ Brown does. I'm going to make that trade. The Seahawks trade for Jamal Adams felt like desperation. The AJ Brown trade felt like a trade, we're going to take the next step. Like, it just feels like there's a difference. Whereas I also just kind of go back to what I was saying. I think John drafts for good players, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think he's drafting based off what is the ceiling. Because I think he's at this point in his career where, in his era in Seattle, where another horrible draft, and if they miss the playoffs again, he's probably out of a job. Because they're paying Mike Macdonald a ton of money, and he was highly sought after, and they know they have somebody. Right? They need to make sure they put him in a position. And Mike Macdonald might at some point say, hey, I can win with good players. You got to get me, or I can win with good players, but I can really win with great players. And I need a GM to come and get me great players. Whereas Howie Roseman, he's not worried if Jalen Carter fails, because he had Fletcher Cox at the time. He had all these other good players, Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. You can take the risk, right? Seattle in that draft really needed to take Devin Witherspoon to help try and fix the worst secondary in football. What they should have done is probably taken Jalen Carter, but, like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, there's just a different mentality, it feels like. And I think just Pete being fired really, like, accelerated that stress level. And just like this, Corey said, they built their roster from the trenches out. If you took Jalen Hurts first and then tried to build an offensive line around him, he never would have made it.
Yeah.
And I think in a way you're kind of seeing that in Indianapolis with Shane Steichen, who came from Philadelphia, was a superstar. Now he's on the hot seat because they probably took a quarterback a year earlier than they should have, when they probably should have continued to build out their trenches.
Yeah, and the only thing about when you bring up Jalen Carter, and we had our preview show before then, and we tossed his name around. But again, man, it was just a perfect spot where he landed in Philly, and like you said, the key, what you said, was they were able to afford, that gamble that this guy could either be a nightmare or one of the top 5 in football. Because you could afford it, right? And he slipped all the way to 9, right? So you could look at it like that. It's not like he went 6, and it would have been interesting to see if Philly had the 5th pick, would they have taken Carter, right? Because there were a lot of character issues with him, beyond just a little bit of stuff. But you listen to Philly and what they say, they like guys with chips on their shoulder. You can even see with their head coach. He rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Right. But he's a reflection of the attitude that the maybe a lot of the players coming through that door, though. Jalen Carter's, a lot of these guys, they have that mentality. So you draft guys like that as well. Like you mentioned, this is football. You need guys like that. It's not all about having the best character. Like, yes, that's important, but you got to look beyond that sometimes too. Like the Malik McDowell thing I really hope that still isn't scaring the guy. I mean, feels like that was 20 years ago now. So, but it's gonna be I like what you said, man. Like this is gonna be maybe one of the most interesting drafts we see, because it's a full off season with Mike and John, and no excuse. I had to rush everything and blah blah blah, like we were last year. It's like, this is a very big year for you, man. Yeah, so we'll see what happens, man. But moving on, we'll just come back and discuss a few other things. But looking at some of the impacts assistant coaches have, and what role do impactful assistant coaches play in a team's success, such as the Eagles. We're seeing some changes right now, slowly. Obviously, our offensive coordinator, but some other guys that are coming into play. How important, man, do you see a supporting group of assistants with a team, especially like we're talking Eagles? So especially, if we look at the Eagles, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the impact of successful and talented assistant coaches is massive. It's the reason why the Eagles are back in the Super Bowl again for the 3rd time since 2018. You look at the 2018 squad, that had Doug Peterson as your head coach, but you had Frank Reich as your offensive coordinator, who had a pretty successful run in Indianapolis before things got a little bit of bad luck at the quarterback position with Andrew Luck, kind of derailed things. Their defensive coordinator was Jim Schwartz, who was a former head coach, kind of a maniac, but was a really good fit, kind of like what you're talking about, really like Sirianni, really fit the city, embodied Philadelphia, that mentality, which gets the team and the city all bought in, kind of creates just that energy, right? The LOB, we had that energy that fit really what was going on in Seattle at the time. So they win the Super Bowl, things kind of fall apart, they reset. We bring in Nick Sirianni. Who does he have? Shane Steichen.
Mm-hmm.
Runs some incredible RPO action, unleashes some new things we just haven't really seen from a quarterback like Jalen Hurts. And then you had Gannon, who was just the sack master defensive coordinator. They almost broke the NFL record for sacks. And that includes having 0 in that Super Bowl, which probably 1 or 2 sacks in that Super Bowl, they win that game. But he's gone on to Philadelphia, and Shane has gone on to Indianapolis and had varying levels of success or not success. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, Sirianni again doesn't be like, oh, I've lost all my assistant coaches. I went out and I figured out a guy that can come in and make my team better, Kellen Moore. I went out and found a defensive coordinator, former head coach, that can make my defense get back to what it was 2 years ago, in Vic Fangio. Right? He essentially has two head coaches as his offensive coordinators. Doug Peterson had 2 head coaches as his offensive and defensive coordinator. Sirianni twice, 2 years ago and this year. Kellen Moore's probably going to go get the Saints job if he wants it. And Vic Fangio, he might be ready to do kind of the Steve Spagnuolo, like, I'm just going to get paid handsomely and run this defense in Philadelphia. But if he wants to be a head coach again, maybe there's a shot in the next year or two if Philadelphia makes a few runs. But it's just like, when's the last time we felt like we had a head coach at offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator?
Well, and that's the interesting thing here, Mike, because I'm just looking. So, like you said, you had Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen from 2021 to 2022. Both of them, they're often now as head coaches. The biggest consistent, though, I would say for this Eagles team, and this is, again, something Seattle lacks, and it's going to drive, I know, our listeners crazy, is Jeff Stoutland. He's their offensive line coach, and he has been there since 2013. He is considered probably the best O-line coach in the NFL. He developed Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens. You know, he's developed so many guys. Johnson, all these guys. Brooks, he's been there for years and developed O-line, and he's stood the test of time. They had a little bit of a hiccup in 2023 with Brian Johnson, Sean Desai, Matt Patricia. And then what does Sirianni do? Cool, now I'm going to go back and do what I did before. Get Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio in here. But the biggest and most influential assistant coach they've had has been Stoutland. And that's what drives me nuts is, like you said, for the Seahawks, we can look at the Pete Carroll era, and you got Shane Waldron. And I still don't know how that dude's still getting jobs. He's now down there with Udinsky in Jacksonville. You got Clint Hurt, who's now the D-line coach for the Eagles. Ken Norton Jr.'s come back into the fold as a linebacker coach with Washington. But the last real, guy that went off and did something and was super successful was Dan Quinn. That was the last true Seahawks coach we can say, yeah, he grew up in the system. He went off and did something. Bevel never got really a head coaching job unless it was an internship, and he's never really been as successful as he was in Seattle. None of the coaches. Chris Richard goes off to Dallas. He's got a bit of a year and a bit there where he's running a good defense, and then you don't hear of him anymore. And then you look at this staff now. Ryan Grubb's out already. Scott Huff's out already. The QB coach is out already. This is where I wonder, Durde and the defensive side, I think are going to get things, they're good, and I think you got a good group there. But that's because you have a head coach running that side of the ball in Mike Macdonald. Now, this is where it's going to be interesting to see what does Clint Kubiak do with a John Benton and, the guys that he's going to start bringing in. How much does that change now that you're going to actually have a cohesive, which I think is a key word in this, a cohesive offensive side of the ball? This might be the first time in a while for Seattle with Mike Macdonald where he's going to get the right pieces around him, where Pete Carroll went with more familiarity of people that he knew were just going to fall in line and weren't going to push the envelope. I don't think Mike Macdonald's going to do that, because everything I have heard is Clint Kubiak was the guy from the beginning and always was the guy. They were just waiting to see if he was going to want to leave New Orleans. Hank Fraley and the whole Hank Fraley thing where everyone goes, oh, well, Hank Fraley was really the choice. No, it was Kubiak, and Fraley was actually the fallback option. So this is going to be really interesting now to see if this is who Mike Macdonald is tying his wagon to. How impactful can this new offensive coaching staff be to, again, help Seattle get back to being an NFC contender? Because when you look at again, we talked about the drafts earlier. Now we're looking at the coaching staffs. Again, you see this massive mismatch of how well and consistent the Eagles have been. They have a hiccup, they fix it immediately and go back to what works. I don't know if Seattle's never really done that. They haven't been able to go back and go, hey, what works? Because when it worked, it was a 2-coordinator offensive system with one guy calling run plays and one guy calling pass plays.
Yeah, honestly, with the Grubb, I don't think I have any issue with that decision to give him a shot. That was a high risk, high reward move where if you told me the Seahawks won 13 games this year and had a top 8 offense and basically Geno Smith looked like Michael Penix last year at UW and DK Metcalf went off, I would have been like, oh yeah, I could have seen that. It worked. The routes didn't work. He's definitely a little bit in over his head, and he's going to go have a good run with trying to keep Kalen DeBoer, still employed at Alabama next year. You go the Kubiak route. I think it's perfect. I think the Shanahan-Kubiak scheme perfectly complements a good defense. Ball control, running the football, play action, easy passes, and then you get the defense to suck up just a little bit and you make them pay with some, deep crossers, or you get your play action deep shots and really that's your offense. You don't even need a superstar quarterback. The scheme just allows someone to be competent. It allows your running backs, if they follow, the scheme, to be great. There's a lot of pieces in place. And I think you bring in Kubiak, who can bring a modern version of that, which is awesome, understanding what 2025 football looks like these days. After everything he went through in New Orleans this year with all the injuries, like an insane amount of injuries, plus you bring in a guy that doesn't know anybody, like what Ryan Grubb was. Clint knows everyone. He grew up in the NFL. Like you saw immediately, he brought in some of his guys that were a part of his staff or in the past had some relation to his dad or Shanahan. Like the NFL has 14 or 15 teams that run some variation of the Shanahan Kubiak scheme, right? Like it's that branch. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And so I'm less concerned about coaches leaving and stuff. I feel like it's a safe offense, and you need superstars, but I feel like we have a safe offense now to where if Geno buys in or whoever that quarterback is, and we can improve the offensive line a little bit more, we can have an offense that, just like all the other Shanahan McVay type style offenses, sits in that 5 to 12 range.
Yeah, you know what? I thought we were gonna have a pretty safe offense the last couple of seasons. When you look at this roster, obviously the offensive line's been an issue, but we were ready for them to go off. And I agree. And Bryce and I, that's the same thing we thought with Ryan Grubb. It was like high risk, high reward. You're thinking outside the box. Hey, cool. It looks like a good idea. We're all pumped. Let's see how it goes. The good thing is they didn't wait around. They weren't like, well, let's run this back. That would have been the worst case scenario. You realize, this, not a mistake, but it just, it didn't work out. And maybe he goes back to college and maybe he makes another return to the NFL and it works out for him in a different system, but under different circumstances. Didn't work here. But, moving and talking about, leadership, and we discussed, touched on that a little bit with Sirianni and the GM in Philly and just how, when I touched on, just the chip on his shoulder and that leadership, how that trickles down. How do you see that leadership in Philly, and then sort of compare it? And it's tough because Mike's, he's this defensive guru with the X's and O's, but it's kind of early as far as his leadership's concerned. Like, how is he gathering that locker room? But how would you compare we could definitely compare John Schneider. So leadership wise, how do you compare the front office and the coaching staff, Mike Macdonald, John Schneider, compared to what Philly's doing so far with Mike and then obviously with John?
Yeah, I think this year is definitely the year where we'll get clarity on it, because this is a draft that Mike was very adamant in that article with John Boyle. I want to be in Mobile. I want to see what's going on. Remember, he wasn't a part of that last year, which was very strange. I understand a lot was going on, just taking on the job, but him and John were there. I thought that was cool to see that Mike's getting a little bit more of his hands in this thing. And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. I think Mike is that kind of coach that might be a little bit more Sean McVay and maybe Mike Shanahan, but Kyle Shanahan, where he's got a little bit more say than maybe the average coach, just because of how highly he was sought after and what the way he's respected and thought of and paid. I think he understands this is a very important season for the team, and so he wants to be more involved. And I would love to know what role he had with hiring of Clint Kubiak. I doubt it was basically, hey, an article that comes out in November that says that John Schneider had to convince Mike Macdonald to hire Ryan Grubb. Like, I don't want to ever hear that ever again. Like, that is a quick step to one of those two losing their job, and probably both if they're not careful. You never hear about that in Philadelphia. You hear about Nick Sirianni kind of being a little bit of a crazy, hothead, wild guy. But you know what? He does a good job at picking out which offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators he wants on his team. He creates great plays. He figures out a way to motivate his guys. They probably think he's a little bit crazy, kind of like Pete, maybe in a little bit of a different, younger way. But like, you see some of that. And then you have this veteran presence in Howie Roseman. And also, just beyond that, you have the owner. right? Jeffrey Lurie is one of the most respected and aggressive owners in the NFL. This dude is like, for the Seattle Mariner fans out here, he is literally the exact opposite of what Mariners ownership is. This dude will pay as much as it takes, as he's allowed to win. He has no problem extending guys. He has no problem making trades. He has no problem cutting guys if it allows him to get in a position to get a better player, right? Like, him and Howie Roseman, they didn't wait to see if Carson Wentz would turn it around. They could have easily waited one more year to see if he was still there. Nope, we're moving on. We're taking someone else. We're going to take a shot on Jalen Carter. We're going to trade for A.J. Brown. We're going to sign a running back in Saquon Barkley that we think can still be a superstar. We don't think running backs are fully dead. Not everyone thinks like that, right? We're kind of, this is the first time in 15 years we're kind of seeing the light of what obviously a great offensive line is a big part of it, but what a special running back can do. He's going to go out. I'm going to go rescue Mekhi Becton, right? It creates a belief from ownership to general manager and front office down to the coaching staff to where he feels like, you're giving me the most talent possible. I'm going to make it work with amazing coaching staff. Like, it's just all connected. And right now in Seattle, we don't know exactly what role Mrs. Paul Allen's sister has. I'm not always impressed by what John Schneider says in his interviews. I don't love I don't believe in paying guards stuff. I don't love the nonchalant, like, yeah, we're working on it stuff. Like, again, his record and his resume speaks for itself. He's probably one more good run away from being a Hall of Fame general manager, but like, because of what he did, but again, it's just a different vibe, to be honest with you. And I'm curious if Mike Macdonald can shake that up. I know he can't really shake up the ownership structure, but can he get a little bit more fire under John to make some changes about how we approach free agency, how we approach the draft? If we're going to make trades, who are we trading for to make sure it's worth what we're doing?
Well, it's interesting because, like, you know, I kind of jotted some notes down on the aggressive leadership here and kind of thought, like, comparing the two, what's the differences? And so when you look at one thing the Eagles do, like you're talking about, the trades they've made, like Howie Roseman is willing to part with draft picks for guys. Like, he is constantly willing to do that to go get proven talent, where John Schneider likes to hoard draft picks and try and get guys in the draft, you know, avoid big free agents, rely on undervalued free agents instead of the superstars. So, you know, like, the Eagles have this kind of go all in on proven stars, while the Seahawks want to build through young talent and avoid overpaying. Then we go and we get ourselves into situations where we make the Jimmy Graham trade, or we make the Jamal Adams trade, and we make these dumb trades that ruin the chemistry. And then the other big thing was QB strategy. The Eagles are flexible while the Seahawks are loyal. Like, you look at that whole thing that you're saying, Carson Wentz, after an MVP season, you know, they get ready and they bring in Nick Foles and they keep Nick Foles around. They don't, yes, he wins the Super Bowl.
Can't win a Super Bowl.
And yeah, but he goes and wins the Super Bowl, but then you don't go and try and get rid of him. You keep him around because you're not sure if Wentz is going to falter. And what did he do? He got hurt again. They put Foles back in. Then they go and draft Jalen Hurts in the second round. There was no like, okay, cool. So Foles has moved off now. He's gone and he's left. And we're going to, you know, this is Carson's show. If Carson doesn't get back, we're going to go make a move. We look at Seattle, like, yes, we stayed with Russell, but we never drafted in that period anyone that could challenge Russell to be ready to be his successor when we decided it was time to move on. So now we go to Geno, which is fine, but we haven't aggressively sought a franchise quarterback for a replacement at any point in this. And all we heard from John Schneider was the Ron Wolf way of doing things is getting this quarterback and start, you know, replenishing that room and moving pieces around. Never. You know, the Eagles are willing to pivot and take risks at quarterback, while the Seahawks stick with the stability and longer even if it limits the upside of them, right? It's just, you know, and again, even cap management. Like, I think this will be interesting now that Matt Thomas is no longer involved in Seattle's cap, but the Eagles have been so good at being creative with how they structure contracts and restructure things and move money around. You know, like, you think about it, after the 2020 Super Bowl run, like 2 years ago, most of this core has come back in 2 years with how the cap's been and everything. They haven't lost a lot of guys, you know, and Seattle for the longest time will move off of guys and, you know, don't want to overpay for this guy and don't want to do this. Like, they kept the LOB together for that period of time. but they haven't done anything like that since. You look at our O-line, it's been a revolving door at center. It's been a revolving door at guard, at tackle, at all these different areas. The Eagles manipulate the cap to stay competitive yearly. The Seahawks preserve cap space generally and avoid financial risk. And that's why I'm going to be interested with Joey Lane and how he maneuvers and manipulates the cap. You look at Leonard Williams' current reconstruction that they've done with his. What does that say? I think that's, to be honest, for me, everyone thinks it has something to do with DK and Geno. I think that's their way of restructuring money for their draft picks, their practice squad, and everything in August. That money that they got back is for that. There's other levers they're going to pull to create their free agency cap space. Leonard Williams restructure is more for what they're going to have to do after August.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, I know you guys talked about it on your previous shows. Like, there's a ton of levers to pull. I don't think any of us had Leonard Williams as being the first lever to be pulled.
No.
And so I think I was, my first initial instinct is like, that's a little bit early. Does that have anything to do with Geno, or is that a trade? But I think you're right. That does make some sense. And again, it just seems like it's such a stressful process with Seattle every year. And you just don't hear about it as much with the other NFL teams. And you don't hear about Philadelphia being in cap hell, right? And they're paying a quarterback $50 million. The Chiefs are paying Mahomes $50 million back when that was a crazy amount of money. And you rarely ever hear about them in cap hell. They made one decision, and that was to trade Tyreek Hill. And literally the pieces they got from that trade has helped them continue to be a dynasty. And so it's just interesting. I don't know what role. Again, I think a little bit of that has to do with ownership and in certain ways in which the money is moved around and things. It's just concerning. We heard this a year or two ago, some concerns about cash flow. And I know that some of that was blown off by John Schneider, but it's just things you don't want to hear about your NFL team, right? We hear about it enough on the baseball side of how broke the Mariners are. You don't normally hear that when you used to have the richest owner in all of pro sports with Paul Allen. And I don't know what's going on, but it just seems like it's a weird conversation that we have to have every year. And you have it when you have bad contracts. And I'm not saying that all these contracts are bad, but the Draymond Jones contract's a bad contract. It is. The Noah Fant contract, he's up for probably getting cut because it wasn't a good contract. Like, some of these guys that are getting brought in, the Will Dissly contract. Like, there's just so many weird contracts that I used to kind of put that all on Pete Carroll overstepping, and now I kind of wonder if that was more John Schneider.
Yeah,
like Mookie says here, he goes, the Graham trade was fine. It was absolutely insane to then go and replace Max Unger, who was a Pro Bowl All-Pro center at the time, with Drew Nowak, who had basically never been a center. It was also bad to bring in Graham and not fire Bevel or make him realize Graham wasn't an inline tight end. Like, when we went and traded for Jimmy Graham, and this is for me where the whole era fell apart. Okay, cool. You go and get this guy, and then you do not know how to use him. Like, did you not watch how New Orleans and Drew Brees and Sean Payton used this guy? He was a slot receiver, a big slot receiver. He was never meant to block. You want those guys, go get them in the draft and go get your meaty blockers in the draft. Don't rely on a guy that's literally asking to be used as a receiver and get paid receiver money as an inline blocker in your offense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Hey, let's move on and talk some line, right? Because we have some pieces, right, on both defensive line. That was something that improved a little bit for sure. The defensive line, offensive line was issues, but you started seeing, okay, the return of Abe Lucas, and then gave you some hope there. Charles Cross, solid. But so if you were to look at the line, because we talk about Philly's trenches and how they build out from the trenches, and that's how really they've been so successful. And then, like you said, this year now they were able to go get a couple of DBs that look really good. So if you look at this line for Seattle, what strengths do you see? If you want to focus on the strengths first and say, okay, you know what, there's some pieces to work with here on both sides of the ball. So what are those for you?
I'd say you have above average tackles when healthy. I think Cross, you saw his potential in a couple games this year. It looked like one of the 2 or 3 best tackles in football. But Trent Williams in San Francisco can look like a middle of the road left tackle if you got, a bunch of slot receivers on your offensive line. Like he can't protect the quarterback all by himself. It's one unit coming together, 5 people coming together as one unit. And I think Cross is in that range. If you give him a strong left guard and a good center, I bet you he's a Pro Bowler. He might even mess around and get some all-pro information or appreciation. He's a guy I would 100% do that 5th-year option. You want to give him as much of a runway as possible. I'm even open to extension as early as possible, because I think if we do finally wise up and make some moves in free agency that are real, or we make an aggressive move with a trade or in the draft to fix the interior offensive line, then that allows these tackles to really reach their ceiling. Same thing with Abe Lucas. If you feel like he's healthy, I think he's a top 10 right tackle in football. He's shown that when he is healthy, he's just never healthy. But he was healthy for the second half of the season, and there was no issues with him. It seems, and it sounds everything like we heard after the season, is he feels good. It's his first real off season in years. I think this is a good opportunity. It's one of those guys where it's kind of like the Warriors in the NBA. They extended Steph Curry when he was having ankle injuries.
Yep.
And so because they believed in his health and his potential, they got him at like $20 million a year when he should have been making 40. And that's the reason why they were able to go out and go get Kevin Durant and do all that superstar stuff that they did. So I think you have those bookends. You have to figure out your interior offensive line. You have to either have another star with one of those 3, or you need 2 good players that then can cover for that one. I mean, you want all 5 to be great, but you need to figure that out. And that's where I think they need to be aggressive in free agency. Preferably, I think a center, if you're going to really be running this Kubiak Shanahan scheme with the responsibilities of a center, or you need to be aggressive in the draft. And there's some pretty darn good guards and tackles that are moving to guard in the NFL that are available.
What about the defensive side of the ball? We on the D line here.
I think you got your all-pro in Leonard Williams. I think that's a guy that you probably can expect to be really, really good to great for probably 2 more seasons. I think that's realistic. That's kind of what you paid for, and that's what I would expect. I think you have a bunch of really good bridesmaids, I guess would be a groomsman, I think is a right way to say it, with Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. Those are guys that their ceiling, in my opinion, is a red chip. And that you need red chips to win Super Bowl, to get to division titles and to maybe even get to a Super Bowl. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's the blue chips that really make the difference in helping you win that Super Bowl. Like each of these Super Bowls that the Chiefs have won, the best player on the field, along with Patrick Mahomes, has been Chris Jones. Like unbelievable. You just watch his tape of all the Super Bowls, even the one that they lost against Tampa. Like this dude is a superstar, but we just don't ever hear much about defensive tackles, right? And so Leonard Williams is not Chris Jones, but he has the potential to be a blue chip. Leonard Williams played like a blue chip player this year. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think we even saw he got like 4th for Defensive Player of the Year nomination and stuff for a couple votes. Like that's awesome. You need to find another one. If you believe in Witherspoon, you believe that you can figure it out with Tariq Woolen. You got a good safety. You got good linebacker play. Hopefully we re-sign Ernest Jones. I think you have everything. You have the middle with Murphy, and you have Leo, and you have good pass rushers. This defense looks like it's a blue chip elite edge rusher away from making that jump to being the Mike Macdonald jump that we saw in Baltimore. He went from a bad defense, I believe, to 12 to 8 to 1. And that one was like laps around everyone else. And he didn't have a blue chip pass rusher, but he got a few more red chips, and he turned Jadeveon Clowney's clock back to where Jadeveon Clowney looked like a blue chip for 1 year. Kyle Vanoy looked like a blue chip for a year. Matabike, I think is how you say his name. Like he looked like a nice impersonation of Chris Jones. So like there's those pieces there of what Mike can do in Baltimore. I just would love to see him. Let's see him get his queen for his chessboard. Get that move. Get that person. And whether that's a trade, I'm not saying you trade the farm for a Myles Garrett, but like if that's a trade or if that is at pick 18, we're taking a Mike Green or a Shamar Stewart. Like if whoever Mike believes is that guy, yes, everyone's saying you need to take a quarterback or you need to take an offensive lineman. Yeah, you probably do at some point, but if you can get your blue chip edge rusher, that'll help your offense because your defense is just going to be that much better.
So just speaking to like everything you said there, Mike, when I look at the, Eagles versus Seahawks and how they've constructed their trenches over the years, you look at like the Eagles, for example, Lane Johnson, Mailata, Dickerson, Jurgens, Kelsey, like we're talking first round, seventh, second, sixth round guys. Okay. We flip to the Seahawks. We've got Cross as our only first round pick, really, that we've had. 2/3 in Lucas and Damian Lewis, one who's not even on the team anymore. And then Evan Brown and Phil Haynes have been free agents. And Phil Haynes really was a draft pick that was kind of a guy that we threw and hoped that it would work. Like he wasn't anything to, go right home about. Like we have these issues. And then you flip to the defensive line, Hanson Reddick, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Fletcher Cox, like first round, fourth round, free agent that they picked up in Hanson Reddick. You go to Seattle's, Chenna, good pass rusher, not elite. Boy Mafe, developing into a solid starter. Maybe we can say that, maybe. Like, we'll have to see. Darrell Taylor, we don't even have, and he was a second-round pick, and he never materialized in anything. Jaron Reed, he's a veteran, and we've had him for a while, but he's not solid. He's not dominant anymore. And Leonard Williams is our best player, but Leonard Williams isn't young. And we had to trade to acquire him. Like, when you look at those ways of constructing the two trenches, you can see why there's a massive gap between what Seattle has and what Philadelphia has, and why this is constantly a thing. Like, it's frustrating because I don't know how, as a GM, you can look at your team and go, that offensive line is not holding us back. The fact that we don't have an elite pass rusher and an elite defensive line rotation is not holding us back. Like, yes, we have a second. We talk about the Legion of Boom all the time, and we talk about Sherm and Chancellor and Thomas, but people that really watch that Seahawks defense, Michael Bennett, Chris Clemens, Red Bryant, Brandon Meebane, Mike, you can go on and on that defensive front. Like they made it easy on the back end. Not saying our guys on the back end were not phenomenal. They were all great. But that defensive pass rush and that rotation made that defense special, made that team special. And I'm in agreement with you. Like, if there is a Mike Green or a Shamar Stewart sitting at 18, and this guy can come in and make the trade for Myles Garrett, and you're going to go get a guy that is literally someone where the OC looks, and I know it from my coaching, when you find a guy on that defense that is going to wreck your game plan, you have to do everything you can to stop him or mitigate him. We don't have a guy on our defense that does that at all.
Yeah, and that's that question. Is John willing to hope that that guy is there at 18? Or is his job truly on the line and he feels like he needs to trade the farm? Because he fired probably his second to last bullet was on Jamal Adams, won him a division championship, but the long-term effects were horrific for this franchise. He's got one more barrel in the chamber, in my opinion. Is he willing to take that risk and go after a Myles Garrett or maybe Micah Parsons in the summer if Micah decides him and Dallas can't come to an agreement? I know he's a big fan of Dirty in Seattle and stuff, and so we'll see. I don't think he's going to make that trade. I don't know if Myles Garrett wants to go to Seattle. I personally think Myles Garrett, if he really does get traded, is going to end up with the Commanders, or he's going to end up probably like in Miami or Philadelphia, which is scary because that's the type of move Philadelphia would make, because they don't care about pick number 31 or 32. They'll give up two of those to get the best edge rusher in the NFL and stuff. So we'll see what he ends up deciding to do. I feel like you're just short on that piece, and I'm curious what kind of pressure he feels. If he doesn't feel that much pressure, then yeah, you take Mike Green, you take Shamar Stewart, and you hope that they develop right away. But you have a bunch of guys that can get 8 to 10 sacks, and you need those guys to win division titles. You need a guy that's going to get you 15 to 17, that's going to get you in the conference championship game, that's going to get you playing on Sunday in the Super Bowl. And we haven't had that guy since Frank Clark, and he had 14 one year. We traded him for a pick, right? Because we don't want to pay him. And so I'm not saying Frank Clark was that guy, but he also did win a couple Super Bowls in Kansas City, so it kind of worked out for them. But you need to find that guy. Like, that should be the most important thing, first of all, on the defensive side. And that's arguably, in my opinion, as important as fixing the interior offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about you brought it up early in the show about verse, right? You talk about like how many people were saying, oh, well, Aaron Donald's retired, so thank God, like that's over, right? And then all of a sudden they pick up two good looking young guys, and looks like they're not missing a beat. Donald, one of the best to ever do it, but again, another organization is Sean McVay, and they just, it starts from leadership, man. It starts from the top. So we got to keep going back to, it is what it is, John Schneider. So it is going to be interesting to see what, it'd be interesting just to get inside John's head, and, do you feel anything? Like, do you even think you're on any kind of hot seat? I mean, he might not, right? I mean, I don't know what the conversations are like. And so, but
we'll know in free agency. I think we're going to know.
Well, you will. And I think, like you said, I agree with you guys. I'd like, if there's a stud and some game record on the edge, man, yes, get him, because I don't know, man. I just think I'd rather attack the old interior O-line in free agency. I want to get that out of the way and get, we've discussed this. And then you don't have that pressure to be like, oh, I got to hit this in round one. I don't think he wants to go that route. Like, I got to hit this in round one or round two. And I'm going to solve my interior line problems. Cause I think that's a huge gamble, right? I think take care of that in free agency. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think personally, like, if I was the GM, I'm not walking out of free agency without Dahlman from Atlanta. Like, I think he is the perfect fit. He's 27. He runs a very similar scheme, and I think he's a seamless fit and can help Geno or a young quarterback, whatever route we decide to go. It looks like it's going to be Geno at least for now. And then that allows you, and if you don't get him, your fallback is one of these couple guards that are pretty good. I'd like the guy that's going to be playing the Super Bowl, and Mekhi Becton. But I think those are your two. You do not leave free agency, which is probably day one or day two of free agency, without one of those two players. When's the last time Seattle made a move on day one of free agency?
Draymond Jones.
Ages. You right. Okay. And look how, but even then we were like, oh, that's cool. Who is he? It wasn't like the clear, like, oh, okay, nice. Like, that was like, oh, that's a nice up and coming player that turned out he wasn't. And so that's where I go, because then you can go into the draft. You can take the best defensive edge player available at 18. There's no pressure. There's going to be one of them there most likely. And then you can sit back, watch, and see what teams are trading Myles Garrett for. If it's 2 first-round picks and a player, now you know that Micah Parsons is probably going to be worth 75% of that, maybe 80% of that, because Micah has one less year on his deal. He's a lesser player than Myles Garrett. He's a different player than Myles Garrett, but he is a perfect fit for what Mike Macdonald needs. I cannot think of a more perfect player, probably other than Myles Garrett, than Micah Parsons. And who knows, if they don't, maybe he does sign a massive extension. It's the Cowboys. But the Cowboys are also super dysfunctional, and their future looks very iffy at best right now. I think it's pretty clear Dak's not that guy. And I think it's the coaching thing's kind of weird, and we have a connection with Micah. It just makes me wonder if it really is 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett, then I will gladly trade our first-round pick in 2026 and our second-round pick in 2026 for Micah Parsons. Wouldn't you guys?
Yeah, man.
In that scenario, you also get a guard or an interior offensive lineman, and then again, this is probably fantasy land. I'm probably getting into Madden football. But what if you went Dahlman, Mike Green, or Shamar Stewart at 18, and then you found a way week 2 of training camp to bring in Micah Parsons? With Geno Smith as your quarterback, everything else is back. That's a Super Bowl contending team, in my opinion. Like, realistically, if all that happens.
And especially the way we think of Mike Macdonald, how he's getting close to putting together maybe a top 5 defense. So Bryce, your thoughts?
I'm on board with that. I don't know how realistic it is to get either Parsons or Myles Garrett. Like, honestly, like That's the problem. And you got to figure out how you're going to clear the cap space for it. That's the other half of this too, which is another conversation to have. For me, I think for a successful offseason for me, and I've said it from the beginning, is it's something Mike Holmgren said, and it's always stuck with me. And when I watch the off seasons now of how Seattle operates, he said his biggest mistake when he was GM and head coach of the Seahawks was he spent money in free agency on defense and went young in the draft on offense with offensive linemen and everything. He goes, if he could go back in time, he'd flip it. You spend your draft capital on young defensive players because they're hungrier to make the money, and you go get proven veterans, especially on your O-line and stuff, in free agency. And I don't mean Laken Tomlinson. I mean, go get, okay, you know what? If we went into free agency this year and in wave 1 and wave 2, we walk out with Dahlman and Becton, I'm happy. I'm like, cool. We can take a 3rd round or 2nd round guard to develop because we're not sure if Christian Haynes, even though I think this scheme with Kubiak fits Haynes' skill set way better than what we ran last year with Grubb. And then you can go get a true edge in this draft at 18 if one falls. That to me is the way you should be attacking this offseason. Stop doing what you've been doing, which is dumpster diving on veterans and risking it on 3rd and less picks in the O-line range, 3rd down to 6 or whatever. Go get a proven commodity that has a good NFL track record and actually give your quarterback and your offensive coordinator who's came in and your new O-line coach that has 33 years of experience the opportunity to actually get the offense off the ground. Because again, like we talked about, if you get a great edge piece from Mike Macdonald, and he takes this defense to a top 5 unit, if you go get an average offensive line and we can have an average to above average offense, that helps out that defense get to a top 5 unit because they're not put in such shitty positions like they were last year because our offense couldn't function well enough. And they're out there because we're going 3 and out quickly because we passed it 3 times after they just got us the ball back. And the Packers are going back down the field, running it down their throat.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like if you had, I know it's not the same offense anymore, but like if you had Dahlman and Becton on this team this year, like you beat the Giants, you beat the Rams,
you beat the Vikings,
you beat the Vikings. You might have, people kind of forget that 49ers Seahawks game at home had moments of being a little bit closer and stuff. Like I was at that game. There was many moments I wanted to walk out, but then there was a moment we had the ball with like 6 minutes to go to take the lead before Gino threw a pick. Like you win those games, like you're kind of messing around and sniffing at that 2 seed. You're kind of nipping on Philadelphia's heels. And that's what I'm saying. It feels sometimes that we're far away because the wins-loss looks far away, but we're really, I don't think we are. I think we're a strong center or a great guard away from a above average offensive line. You hit 2 of those, all of a sudden the ceiling is, again, the potential is you're playing on Sunday.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
to add to that, a whole new coaching offensive scheme that's going to come into play. So I think with the combination that's why it's going to be a super interesting offseason, and then really looking forward to the season. But you know what? This has been an awesome convo, but let's get into a little because I know we did this last time, but we're going to get into another little mock draft that time of year. And we know it's mock draft. So let's get into the mocks. Bryce, you want to pull it up? We're going to use PFF.
We're going to be using PFF because currently they have the most accurate grading. I looked at a lot of them. I used Pro Football Network last time. It was okay. There were some guys that were there really late that I didn't expect to be there as late as they were, which I don't think is accurate. So we're going to use PFF again. So we're allowed, Mike, rule is we're allowed 1 trade back. That's it.
Okay.
Outside of that, we're just going to go through it and see how the board kind of falls for us.
And I just want to say real quick, we already have a Jackson Dart in the comments. So
of course we do.
The hype is just, I mean, we're only in, I always say we're only in January, but the year's already flying by. But we're still really early from the draft. I mean, can you imagine the lead up? Like we haven't got to the combine yet, Mike. I think this Jackson Dart thing is just going to explode, man.
We also have a trade back, baby. That's what we got from Zach in here. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's see how this board falls for us. Okay, so we'll quickly look. Go up here. So Cam Ward, as we figured. Again, I don't think this is happening. I do not think Shador is going to Cleveland. Travis Hunter to the Giants, a dual Carter to the Patriots. McMillan
Sorry,
to the-
Bryce, real quick. What you think Prime's going to he's going to block that?
I think you'll see Prime pull a Archie Manning, Eli Manning situation.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
He's like,
Shedeur
no
to
way.
me is going to the Giants, or he's going to end up with the Raiders. In the top 10, that's where I see him falling most likely.
Right.
I think Tennessee is probably taking Cam Ward realistically. So we got Abdul Carter. McMillan goes to the Jags. The Jets get Mason Graham. The Raiders take Will Johnson. James
We go,
Pierce.
Pete.
There you go.
So
At
Malik
back-to-back
Starks.
McMillans this year.
Malachi Starks, goes to the Saints. The Bears went with another receiver, which I find interesting. Genty goes to the 49ers, which I still don't think is a reality. Will Campbell, who, again, I don't think Will Campbell will be playing tackle in the NFL. I think he's going to be a guard. Josh Simmons, this is kind of what I figured. He is the top pure tackle in this class, I think. Goes to Miami. Benjamin Morrison, Mike Green. There you go. Right off the board already. He's gone to the Falcons. Mikael Williams is to the Cardinals, and Tyler Warren to the Bengals. So Shamar Stewart's on the board for us. So's Membo. So's Walter Nolan, Calvin Banks Jr., Kenneth Grant, Matthew Golden. There's a lot here. Gray Zabel, which now he's more accurately up his draft board than what we thought. I think at this point with what's like, if I go and pull up, so let's go look at the O tackles. So Membo, Zabel, Connerly, Ezri, Donovan Jackson. Like there's a lot of guys still here. Now, if we go to edge and we take out the O tackles, Shamar Stewart, and then there's a bit of a drop, a little bit, not much, but I think Shamar Stewart, based on what I've heard from Senior Bowl, could be a blue chip guy.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I think you nailed it. Like this offensive line draft is like Seattle. There's no reason they won't be able to get a good interior offensive lineman player at pick 50 if that's the route they go. There's probably some decent options at pick 83. I'd rather them move up a little bit and get a guy at 50 where they're at, and so that basically makes that pick 18 as go get the most valuable player, the best player available. And I like Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer, I think, brings a lot of good culture stuff, and I think he's got a lot of Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard to his game. I also think that's a guy you take probably at the end of round one if you can get a great trade back. Shamar Stewart, if he's there, like just his potential's higher. And if you're drafting like the Philadelphia Eagles, everyone, I can already see now on TV, Daniel Jeremiah, Mel Kiper. Oh man, Shamar Stewart at 18, that's a great pick. Like that's just automatic B+, A-. You move on to the next pick. That's my opinion.
The other player that's interesting here is Kenneth Grant.
The Michigan connection.
Yeah, that's the reason I think he's interesting. He's been a bit of a game wrecker, but it's interesting because for me right now it's between Membu and Stewart. Those are the two I'm thinking about. The only reason I'm thinking about Membu is because you can play him at guard, and if Lucas falters or has another injury, you kick him out.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about a Donovan Jackson, right?
Yes.
He was the best left guard in football. Yeah.
I think Donovan Jackson, we can get at pick 50, honestly. I think he could fall there potentially based on this. So let's take Shamar Stewart. I think give Mike Macdonald an actual potential game-changing edge piece to go around. And who knows? Chenna's due $6 million in an injury guarantee on Feb 14th. We might have a new picture of what's going on with Chenna pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take Stewart. Okay. So Walter Nolan off the board. Okay. Who all went? Let's see here. I know MWM is going to be. My phone started talking to me. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. So Walter Nolan, Calvin Banks Jr., Jack Sawyer. Wow. He did go 22 to the Chargers. Membo goes to the Vikings.
There's no way Jim Harbaugh's taking an Ohio State Buckeye at 22.
I didn't believe that either. I would say more likely I could see that Chargers pick being Kenneth Grant. If he's there still, that will be their pick. Kenneth Grant falls down to the Ravens, so John Harbaugh gets him, and that's pretty suiting. Gray Zabel goes to the Rams, so of course that bites us. The rest of it's kind of what I would expect. The Chiefs go for a corner they need to figure out because Snead's gone. There's Loveland, Matthew Golden. So as we go down here, Jack Beck, Landon Jackson, Tyler Booker to Dallas. Wow, that's high for Scatabo. I don't think he'd be going there, but okay. Okay, yeah. So we're pick here now at pick 50. Let's look at our interior O-line. So Ratledge is there, Jared Wilson, Lampkin. But if I go to O-tackle, both Ezra and Donovan Jackson are there, and I think Donovan Jackson is the better pick.
Yeah, for sure. Really quick, I think it's the top-ranked guy they currently have on PFF that's available right now. It's the Porter from ISU.
Yeah.
Like, that guy is Tariq Woolen, but with maybe a little bit more lock-in, right? Like, and if Tariq Woolen are probably going to be from day one the best special teams player in the NFL. Like, I don't know. If Tariq Woolen's part of Seattle's future, then yeah, I don't think the fit right now makes sense of taking a corner at pick 50. But if you did move on from Woolen, I think you have to seriously consider Porter here. I personally think this guy is a superstar potential. Maybe not a superstar corner, but a great corner, a very good corner. That's a superstar, like a Matthew Slater from New England level player on special teams. He's just an absolute freak and extremely talented. But for what we need right now, I mean, if Donovan Jackson's there was no better left guard in college football this year than Donovan Jackson. That's my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion over Tyler Booker. There also was not a better left tackle in college football this year than Donovan Jackson. Like, there's a chance Donovan Jackson's going to push hard at the combine to be drafted as a tackle because it's more profitable, makes more money, moves up higher in the draft. But if he's there at 50, again, that is a Baltimore Ravens, Philadelphia Eagles pick where the rest of the NFL is like, dang it, man, why did we let him go that far? You run to the podium in Lambeau and you turn that pick in.
So we'll do that. We'll take Donovan Jackson here. Okay, Jaden Higgins, one of my guys, off the board. And one of my other guys, Jalen Royals, is off the board here. Dang, I really would have liked him. Okay, so we come down here. So now we're into this kind of point where, okay, we've taken it 2 trench positions. Now do we start looking at receiver, which I think is going to be a potential need. Tez Johnson's there. Trey Harris is there. Pat Bryant's there. We're all the guys that had a pretty good, Jalen Noel. They've all had, some interesting, Senior Bowls and stuff.
What about QBs?
We can look at the quarterback position. And I swear if you say Jackson Dart, who's right there.
Wow, would you not think about that?
I don't know. Like, I personally don't think Jackson Dart will be there. I think he's going to end up in round 2 is where I think he's going to go.
I think he'd potentially be around 1.
He could be around 1 guy. I think Will Howard being here is more plausible. I think Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers being here are more possible than Jackson Dart.
I mean, Mike, do you think are we taking a quarterback this draft? You think when we get around this point that you start thinking about it? Like, whether, Dart's probably, like, I agree, it's probably not going to be this late. But even a couple of the other guys you mentioned, Milroe, Howard.
Yeah, as Bryce knows, I probably am one of the biggest supporters of Will Howard that you're going to find during this draft season. I probably have the most lofty edit pro comp for him with Bryce, and I think he is a guy that could probably start right away or after a year behind Geno Smith. I think you have a true Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes style where you are a contender with Geno and you're also a contender because we just gave Geno Smith the best offensive lineman in college football last year, and we gave him a potential blue chip, Mike Macdonald, a potential blue chip edge rusher. Like, our team just got way better. So now you can take that risk. You can do this is the Philadelphia Eagles way. You dominate the trenches, which allows you not pick 83. It doesn't feel like the end of the world if we wait another round for wide receiver personally.
Yeah.
Now it feels like a time where if there's a guy you like, let's go get him. Now, Dart is going to be gone in the top 50. And if you're a top 50 quarterback, there's a good chance you get drafted as a trade up in round 1. So you get that 5th-year option. It just,
Right.
Will Levis, I think, is one of the highest guys ever draft in the last 5 or 6 years. Most teams that wasn't in the first round. Most teams just trade over into round 1 to get that extra year because it's so valuable. I talked to someone that, I really trust that had an evaluation on Will Howard and basically says he played like a star quarterback, a franchise quarterback in this during the playoffs, but he looked like a 6th-round pick in the regular season. Now, is that because he was learning Chip Kelly's offense? Is the Michigan tape just so bad that people are just going to have a hard time forgetting? I personally, and he said that right now Will Howard is a day 2 pick at the end of day 2, round 3. That's where he's at. As I've told Bryce and you guys before, I would take Will Howard at pick 50 and I wouldn't bat an eye. But so personally for me here at pick 83, if he is there, I'm taking him. I do think he'll go after Jackson Dart. So I don't think it's realistic to think that Dart is here. I really like Dart. I personally like Howard more. I just think he's a tank. I love his deep ball. I love his leadership, his intangibles. I think he's going to do well to even really well at the combine. And I think what we won't hear until the podcasts and stuff later is how he dominates the interviews. Like he talks and acts and lives like a franchise quarterback. Not saying Jackson Dart doesn't. I just think Will Howard has that potential. So I would take him here.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a wrench into that because, well, not really. I like Will Howard a lot. Mike knows that.
Yeah.
Kyle McCord is also a big guy that I like a lot. And Kyle McCord, I think, is going to come up and be QB4 potentially, or QB4-5 in this with Will Howard, where Dart will be year 3. And I think we can still get either Howard or Howard or McCord in the 4th round. What I want to actually look at here is a D tackle. And I'm looking at, there's Deion Walker here. There's also potentially, where is he in here? Caldwell's another one that's interesting to me. This is a point where I would think maybe if Alfred Collins had stayed on this board, he's a potential guy from Texas to get us a true big interior presence. But he's not there, and I don't like Deion Walker. The other name I like here is Jeffrey Bassett, linebacker.
Yeah, he's a stud.
Worried about Seattle's linebacker depth because really we're relying on Drake Thomas. If Knight goes down or Ernest Jones goes down, we're going to Drake Thomas. And Jeffrey Bassett looks like he's built in a lab. I think he's probably one of the better linebackers. You can play on special teams right away. I think he's a great value pick here in the 3rd round. And again, you're getting yourself a depth piece that if for whatever reason you need to move on at some point, you have a player that can come in and step in.
No, I think that definitely makes sense. Like that's the thing with this pick here at 83. You can go quarterback. There's good receivers. Is Ransom better than Kobe Bryant? Right? Like Ransom had an incredible playoff. Mason Taylor is probably available. Like at tight end, like you have needs. This is just that interesting spot where you're not going to go wrong. Most likely, there's a lot of good options here. It's just what is your preference and what helps you the most that you think at pick 83.
I think Ezra Thomas is interesting. A corner. We talked about one earlier. I think we take a corner here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Corner it is. Okay.
There's so much talent on that Florida State team that just fell apart.
Yeah.
We're gonna see 3 or 4 guys that are pretty good NFL to great NFL players from a 1-win Florida State team.
So this is interesting. Will Howard went. Jackson Dart went. Now where did Will Howard go? Let's have a look here. Jackson Dart went to the Steelers. And let's see here. Jalen Milroe. Will Howard went to the Giants at 103. Okay, so now we know kind of where the rough range is. We got the 49ers picking after us here. Do we go tight end? Or is this the point? I think this is more the point where we take our quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
And I think we take Kyle McCord.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see how this goes out for the rest of it. Okay, so here we go. Now we need to look at getting another guard. What does our guard room look like here? So this is interesting. Jake Majors is here, and so is Miles Fraser. Miles Fraser had a hell of a Senior Bowl. Do we go with Fraser? Do we go with Jake Mayers?
If this kind of goes back to what did you do in free agency, right? Because I think whether you get a guard in free agency or not, if Donovan Jackson's there at 50, I have a hard time passing on him anyways. And I'm happy basically ending the Christian Haynes conversation after one season. Like, just sorry, but we've just upgraded our talent level to a whole tier above what we thought we had or had before. If you didn't get Dahlman and you got a guard, then I would say you take Majors there and you're stoked because you got arguably one of the best centers in college football from day one. But if you went Dahlman, then I don't really know if that makes sense to go there. But we don't have Dahlman right now, so I wouldn't assume we got him.
So we go with a center then?
Yeah, I would.
Majors?
Yeah, I think you just got the best center and the best guard in college football last year, in my opinion.
So we're up again here. I say we start looking at potentially a tight end. We know, like we said earlier, Noah Fant's not going to be around. I like Luke Lachey out of Iowa, sorry, I should say. I think he's a solid tight end for us here. And you know what? He's average draft positions, kind of right around where we are. He's big, he can block, and he can catch. He's not horrible that way. I think we go Luke Lachey here.
Yeah, Shanahan-Kubiak system is very, very friendly to tight ends. I don't think you necessarily have to have a superstar for that position to be great. It helps to have a Kittle. It helps to have a Shannon Sharp. But I think a Barner in this Kubiak scheme is going to absolutely dominate. And having a good blocking tight end that has some surprising athleticism that comes from the Iowa farm, like, absolutely.
Okay. Now we're down into round 6 here. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me because now you got some luxury picks, right? Now this is where we get into that. Now, Caldwell here is interesting to me because he's a big guy. 340, 6'1". There's your true big nose tackle. I say we take Caldwell and fill another need on that D-line. Freeze up Jaron Reed, freeze up Leonard Williams.
What's really quick, what's Tonka or is it Tank? Sorry, how do you say it? Is it Tonka Hemingway?
Where are we?
South Carolina right there.
Yeah.
What's his size?
288, 6'3".
Yeah, he's more speed, but
yeah,
him and Kennard were an absolute dynamic duo at South Carolina. But I think, like what you're saying, we're not bringing back Hankins, and who knows what things look like with Reed. So I think this is a nice day 3 pick of a guy that can probably plug in and play some valuable minutes for you.
So there we go. We got our interior D lineman to add to this. Okay, we got 2 more picks here. Let's take a look at the receiver room. Now, see, this is where it gets interesting because the receiver room really gets thin at about start around 6, end around 5. Anybody standing out here to you, Mike?
I like Brew McCoy. He's a little bit of a character, and he's got a lot of health issues, but former 5-star. That's pretty rough looking group there. I assume Nick Nash is probably gone at that point.
Yep.
What about the tight end? Or I guess, yeah, we already saw the tight ends.
Running back, we could get Donovan Edwards or we get Woody Marks here. Woody Marks is interesting to me. Played well in Lincoln Riley's system at USC, can catch.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you have to go. I mean, Will Shepard was hit and miss.
Another Theo name that got brought up by Zach. Rock Taylor is an interesting guy.
Yeah, Memphis had such an interesting start to their year and then just fell apart. But he's a big boy.
He's a big guy.
Yeah, I'm interested on him if he can come in and push Bobo.
Yep.
I think that's what you're kind of looking for
here. Okay, so now we're down to our last pick. And let's see, what do we have at the linebacker position? See, this is where it gets hard at this point. We're kind of almost at best available player left. So let's have a look here. We'll just get rid of this altogether and go to the all page. So it says Tyler, it's quarterback. Now Dylan Fairchild's still there, which is interesting.
Yep.
You've got Burndell. Jordan Hancock's interesting as well. I do like Dan Jackson at safety, though. He lit some guys up at Senior Bowl.
Mm-hmm. No, he played well. He made himself a little bit of money.
7th round pick. We're flying at it at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So let's see here. And we got some guys. Brendan Myers goes, did we take a cornerback? Yes, we did. So we're going to get a horrible grade. But Shamar Stewart, Donovan Jackson, Ezra Thomas, or as I'm not sure if that's how you say it, but AZ Thomas out of Florida State. We got Kyle McCord, Jake Majors, Luke Lachey, Jameer Caldwell, Rock Taylor, and Dan Jackson. We got a C+ draft grade. And this is where, because we didn't do it exactly how PFF wanted, they gave a shit.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, though, you get your edge guy that you think is a blue chip, and you get a guy that makes your offensive line immediately better day one. Not the, I hope Christian Haynes can play the NFL. It's, no, I just watched that guy destroy Oregon, destroy Tennessee, destroy Texas, destroy Notre Dame. Probably 4 of the 10 best defenses in college football. Like, see, I think Seahawks fans, Mike Macdonald, the front office, everyone would be running around celebrating if our draft day 1 and day 2 starts off with Shamar Stewart and Donovan Jackson.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, look, I mean, we're going to be talking about this all the way to the draft. Free agency's coming up, next, and that's going to be real exciting as well. But we've been talking about this. We got the Super Bowl coming up. Mike, need some predictions here, man. Who do you got in this game? We talked about Philly the whole episode, and because like you said, just I don't know, get tired of talking about KC. But who do you got in this game?
I know I feel bad. I just talked 90 minutes about the Philadelphia Eagles, but I'm taking the Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
I really like Philly. I think they're a great team. That's a good example of how you want to build a team to get to this game. But I've learned for a long time, typically the team with the better quarterback in the game, obviously, but overall wins the Super Bowl. It's very rare that the better quarterback doesn't win that Super Bowl. And I think until somebody truly dethrones at quarterback Mahomes in a playoff game, I'm going to keep betting on Kansas City until Tom Brady ain't here anymore. And Tom Brady is the only guy to have knocked out Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. And now Tom Brady will be in the building. So maybe there's a chance that this means that Mahomes is going to lose his Super Bowl since Brady's calling the game. But again, until I see a quarterback other than Tom Brady beat Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, give me the Chiefs. Give me 34-28.
Nice. Bryce?
Oh, gosh. I don't really know in this. And again, I agree with Mike. If it comes down to a QB duel, the Chiefs are going to win. I'm sorry. Jalen Hurts ain't winning. I would love to see Saquon win. I think he's had a phenomenal year and kind of brought running backs back to, relevance. I'm going to go, I'll be the outcast here. I'm going to go Eagles 27-23 over the Chiefs.
Nice. Yeah. I agree, Mike. Like, you just Patty's a winner, right? And I think on this stage, he's been here way too many times. You could talk about, the offense isn't as good, or, heard all that last year. And what do? They go on and win a Super Bowl. And you can talk about their defense, but he is just a proven winner. And so, yeah, how can you bet against that? I like Saquon, man. I agree with Bryce. It's great. What a year he had. He had a phenomenal year, like MVP talk. But I just, I can't see it. I think, I could see it, but I'm going Chiefs 28-24. So that's who I got. So yeah, man, it should be a good one. I mean, hopefully this is kind of the last Chiefs Eagles matchup, though. You know what I mean? Chiefs for sure, but they just figure out a way to get it done. Like, you know what I mean? It's just everyone's trying to look for the net. Is it Lamar in Baltimore? Is it Josh, and it's Josh's year. Buffalo, they're gonna take him down, and here we are again, right? Chiefs going for another one, man. And you know what? I know people coined it early that he was the GOAT. You know, a lot like really almost after his first. That to me was a little tough when you got a guy over there with 7 rings, right? But if he wins this one, in my books, there's like a real debate because he's got a lot of football left in him. So
yeah, I know Joe Montana got interviewed today and basically said if he wins his 4th, like he's 27, 28 years old, I think,
right,
28 or 29, and he's already got 4. Like Kelsey's probably close to the end. Chris Jones probably has 2 more years before he's probably kind of hits his wall. So like but he's going to probably have 10 years of maybe another wave to try and get another one. It's just fascinating, and it'll be weird because he lost the Super Bowl to Brady, but there's a real chance he passes Brady before he's even 35.
Yeah, and that's why I just thought it was a little disrespectful to you heard people calling him the GOAT, and like you said, Brady at the late age knocks him off, right? So for me, it's still Brady, and then but yeah, like you said, if he wins this one, it's a serious conversation because of his age, right? So
I'm going to say one last thing before we wrap this up, guys. One thing that bugged me about the NFL honors, and not so much the NFL honors, but the Hall of Fame. Mike Holmgren, again, does not make it. And there are coaches in that Hall of Fame that have less of a pedigree than him that are in there. Mike Holmgren should be and needs to be in the Hall of Fame. A guy that took 2 separate franchises to Super Bowls and rebuilt 2 separate franchises from them being basically in NFL oblivion at that point. When he took over the Packers were one of the worst teams in football. He turned them back into being the Green Bay Packers, got Brett Favre going in all of his glory in that 90s period. Comes to Seattle and turns the Seattle Seahawks franchise around. It is an absolute travesty that guy's not in the Hall of Fame.
And people forget, I grew up in a 49ers family. People forget he was the offensive coordinator for Walsh and Seifert during the dynasty. Like he was a massive part in Steve Young. I think he was a little bit late in the Joe Montana, but Steve Young, Brett Favre, Matt Hasselbeck, like just it's an absolute shame. I understand that they want to have a limit on this thing. I think they're looking at the wrong things. You look at Mike Holmgren, and that is a Hall of Fame coach, and it's a shame. I really, really hope they don't wait too long. Not speaking ill of Mike, I want him to enjoy that. I want him to feel what it's like to be honored. I want him to be able to walk out onto Canton, have a speech and not have to have a family member speak for him or anything like that. Like these guys, you have to have a player section, and then you need to have a coaches section. Like I don't understand it. And maybe if you want to make the coaches have to hit a higher marker, so it's not a guarantee a coach makes it every year. But then there's good players. There's good NFL players that aren't in it. Like I think Torrey Holt is close. I'm trying to think what other guys just missed out and stuff. But like, there's no reason Antonio Gates should have had to wait an extra year. No. Like he should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion, with his numbers and stuff. And I don't know. I just feel like they really need to fix it.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, appreciate it, man. Another awesome conversation and wicked having you on. Time flew. But before we get you out of here, man, what do you got going on over there at the 12th Man Rising, and where can everyone find your stuff? Yeah, you can find us over at 12th Man Rising. We got a lot of good stuff coming out as we're getting ready. Pretty much like we talked about, Uchenna Nwosu, Geno Smith. A lot of contract stuff is coming up pretty quick. Some decisions need to get made. We'll have content on that. And then draft coverage. And yeah, stay tuned. Should have some pretty exciting stuff to talk about in the near future. Just we're excited to get into the new season. Excited to watch the Super Bowl, but I'm ready for the Seahawks to make a move to get back to this game. Oh, absolutely. Right, Steakers. Appreciate you, and guys, go over and Mike's and check out all his stuff. Mike, we appreciate it again, and we'll be talking in the future for sure. Thanks, guys. All right, go Hawks.